I'd like to welcome you all here, and it's terrific to be able to have brought such a distinguished group of friends, colleagues, scholars. I will start by introducing Robert Lieberman, who is the acting dean of the School of International and Public Affairs, where we're located on the top floor. We call it top of the world here. You can see why. And Robert is a distinguished political scientist and actually has strong interest in the area in which we are having the conference as well. So he's agreed to open the conference officially. After that, I will say a few words about the Center on Global Economic Governance, under whose auspices we're organizing it here and that I have the privilege of leading here. And then Ravi will tell you a little bit about what we're going to do, the roadmap. And after that, we're just going to delve into it under the leadership of Eric Thorbeck, whom I don't have to introduce. You know him as the Nestor of development economics. I myself had a privilege to work with him for a long time at Cornell University. So the start is very auspicious. And Robert, take the floor. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. For this terrific conference on jobs and development under the auspices, as Jan said, of the Center on Global Economic Governance. In his introduction to this report, Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank, says, it talks a little bit about the role of jobs and labor and employment in development, and says the following. He says, the report finds that jobs with the greatest development payoffs are those that make cities function better, connect the economy to global markets, protect the environment, foster trust and civic engagement, or reduce poverty. And as I was reading the report, that sentence in particular struck my attention, because I thought you could not describe what we do here at CEPA at Columbia better than that sentence. Cities, jobs, poverty reduction, development, employment, environment, and sustainability. These are the core issues of what we here at CEPA call global public policy. And I want to talk for just a minute about the concept of global public policy, which, as I said, is at the center of what we do here at CEPA, and of which the Center on Global Economic Governance and Jan's work and this conference are an integral part. So just a word or two about the center. Jan's going to say more in a minute. The Center on Global Economic Governance is extremely important to the school for a number of reasons. It articulates very closely with the agenda for a global university that our president, Lee Bollinger, has articulated. We here at CEPA are the most global school in the university. About half of our students come from outside the United States, and the topics that we cover in our curriculum and in our faculty's research span the world. And over the last few years, we've worked hard to create a center that would bring into sharp focus, especially in the world that's been transformed by global financial and economic crisis, that would bring into sharp focus the issues of development, of the global economy, of global financial systems, and of global governance that have been thrust into the center of the world stage by that crisis. And CGEG, as we call it, is Columbia's response, is CEPA's response to that crisis. And CGEG, our aspiration at CGEG is to bring to bear the highest quality academic research together with key players not only from the academic world, but from the professional world, from government, from international organizations, and from the world of policymaking more generally, to have productive conversations that can actually result in thoughtful and creative policy change in the world. And that kind of thing is exactly what CGEG is all about, and it's the kind of thing that can only happen at schools of global public policy like CEPA. We're extremely grateful that we were able to entice Jan away from the suburbs out in Ann Arbor to the center of the world here in New York City to make that, help us make that possible. But it's the sort of thing that can only happen at a great school of public policy, at a great school of global public policy, like CEPA. Why do we think so carefully about global public policy, and what do we mean when we talk about global public policy at CEPA? Well, the world is increasingly a global place, and the world of public policy is increasingly global in a number of senses. Policy issues, the issues that we care about and that we study and that we teach here at CEPA span the world and don't respect political boundaries. This report and the work that you'll do over the next day and a half thinking and this report, and I'm sure picking it apart and finding all the mistakes, are focused deeply and closely on the role of states and national governance in creating jobs in their respective societies. But issues like labor and development and all of the other things that I listed a few minutes ago, urban development, security, environmental protection and sustainability, energy security, those issues of the kind that we focus on and that are so important to the future of the world don't respect political boundaries for the most part. The distinctions that we have conventionally and customarily made between local and national and international issues in a lot of the things, in a lot of the policy domains that we most care about don't really make any sense anymore. And so we need to be able to think about public policy with a global perspective in order to solve these issues. There are no more isolated local or national policymakers anymore. Things that we do and think about and worry about here in New York City have ripple effects around the world, and things that happen elsewhere in the world shape the way we have to think about public policy problems and solutions here at home. Second, we live in an increasingly globalized and interconnected world. People, capital, knowledge, models, understanding, travel seamlessly and almost instantaneously around the world. And we can't think about the process of making public policy or studying public policy in isolated local or national silos anymore. And finally, the public policy community, the public policy universe itself is increasingly global. CEPA is a microcosm of that. As I said a minute ago, our students are about half from elsewhere in the world. We have about 85 countries represented in our student body right now. CEPA is an extraordinarily global place, and that is just a small-scale reflection of the world of global public policy, the world of policymaking, and the world of the community of people who think and work and worry about these pressing global concerns is increasingly an international one and a cross-national one. So it's extremely important for schools like CEPA to think about public policy in a global sense and to think about the global context of public policy. And I think there's no better way for us to do that than to host events like this. This is an extremely important report. We're very pleased and proud to be hosting such a comprehensive conference on the World Bank report on jobs and development. And I'm extremely grateful, just a few people, you have to bear with the formalities of ceremonial remarks like this. I want to thank just a few people for making this possible. First, Jan Svejnar, who has really seized the reins of the center since he's been here, and you can see the fruits. We've had a series of events this fall, like this one, really exciting, really extraordinary, seriously intellectually engaging events with important policy ramifications like this. And so we're extremely grateful to Jan for joining us and for putting this together. I want to thank David Coughlin and Geraldine McAllister of the CGEG staff who have worked tirelessly to put this together. Martin Rama and the entire World Bank Development Report team, many of whom I know are here. Thank you for not just an extraordinary report, but for coming to participate in what I'm sure will be a free and frank exchange of views about the contents of the report. But I think it's really important that when a document like this is produced, that it be discussed and understood and probed deeply. And I think the willingness of the World Bank team to come here and participate in this event is a great testimony to the importance of this report and to the willingness of the bank to engage in this kind of activity. So thank you to the World Bank team. I want to thank Cornell University, which is a co-sponsor of the conference, and Ravi Kanbur, who you'll hear from in a moment, for joining us in putting this all together. So I want to just leave you with, again, words of welcome. Thank you all for being here. I'm afraid I'm going to have to introduce and dash, such is the life of a dean. But again, welcome, and I wish you a very enjoyable and productive and engaging day and a half. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. This was more than actually enough to introduce the center, so I'll just say very few words. And I would like to say that the goal of the organizers and all of you is to really engage in the substantive discussions so that, in a way, we'll keep the format as such in order to be as informal in the discussions as possible. So as Robert already mentioned, it's been a pleasure for me to join Columbia, join SIPA here. The center has, as you can see, taken off pretty quickly. It's been due to the fact that the faculty here, students, administrators are extremely forthcoming, and as you can see from the program, we actually have a number of faculty who are affiliated with the center, starting with Joe Stiglitz, Saskia Sassen, and others participating in the discussions. So the goal that Ravi and I kind of set for ourselves was to bring together a group that would best, in some sense, respond and complement Martin Rama and his team who prepared the report. It's a remarkable report. I think the topic is very important, very timely, so that starts, of course, the debate. I think they did an incredible job in terms of bringing together both some of the old themes and putting them in juxtaposition to some of the new ideas, and, of course, then further developing it. So the center itself, just to say a few more words, because Robert already mentioned virtually everything, brings together the faculty members from all over Columbia, graduate students, and gradually we're planning to actually engage people from the outside as well, so that it becomes truly a global enterprise, not just in terms of the topics that it tackles, but also in terms of the makeup. And I think this conference is actually a very good example of it, in the sense that if you look around at the list of people and so on, we've tried, and I think to a significant extent succeeded, in bringing experts who have knowledge, experience, and the energy to discuss the report like this. So over the next day and a half, we will engage in that, and I will, I think at this point, get Ravi Kanbur to come in and give us the roadmap, and then we'll ask Eric Thorbeck to start the first session.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Jan. So let me join my friend Jan in welcoming you all, and on behalf of the co-sponsoring institution Cornell, my institution. Jan and I go back a long way, and this is actually the third in a sequence of conferences that we've held, and we're going to be holding in the future. The first one was sort of broad, covering broad aspects of labor and development across the waterfront, everything, and a big, thick volume came out of that. The second one was more specific on regulation and enforcement, labor regulation and enforcement of labor regulations. And that is sort of a narrower topic, more focused topic, and that's a symposium is coming out in the Review of Development Economics. Maybe it's out already. Right. And then as we were thinking about what to do after that one, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, we got news that the World Bank had chosen labor and development, jobs, as the topic for the next World Development Report. And so we immediately said, yes, that's what we should do. And we fired off an email to Martin Rama. And even before he had drafted the team had drafted a single word of the report, we said we'd like to hold a conference to assess the final product that you. Again, as the dean was saying, it really is a testament to the team that they said yes straight away. They said, yeah, fine, this is perfectly okay. And I should say that myself and I think John Haltiwanger and Ragi Assad are also members of the external review team of the report. So we've been giving our comments on the term papers as we went along, but now the final grades are going to be delivered, Martin, in this meeting. So let me just say a few words about the structure of the conference. And essentially, it's very straightforward. It follows the structure of the report. We have the overview, and then the 3 sections of the report, and we have panels focusing on each of those, and then sort of a forward-looking overview conclusion session. Essentially, each speaker will have 10 minutes on the panels. Joe? I noticed, by the way, the first thing Joe did when he got the report, he looked at the back at the references to see. I made sure there are lots of Stiglitz references in that report, Joe. I should also say that all of you, the panelists, are going to be presenting, and we hope very much that the notes that you use to make your presentations, that you'll send those in, and we'll try to bring those together in terms of policy briefs that will be put out on the CGEG website. So and we'll follow up with you on that. And the final thing I would say is just give my thanks actually to the team, because the first conference in the sequence was alphabetically the Cornell Michigan conference, since Jan was at Michigan, and we have Susan Collins, the dean of the Ford School at Michigan here. The second conference was also a Cornell Michigan conference, and it was at Michigan. Jan organized in Michigan. The third conference now alphabetically is the Columbia Cornell conference, but strangely enough, it's being organized by Jan at Columbia. So this either reveals my skill at fobbing off organizational things to Jan, or it reveals a tremendous generosity of spirit of Jan in actually taking on these organizational tasks. So I want to thank Jan and Geraldine and David very much for doing this. This is not easy to do, and this is the organizational platform. It's on the basis on which we build our intellectual discourse. So let me just end by some observations, brief observations, and raise some questions. Which is main question I want to raise is labor fundamentally a different factor of production from the others? And in the economics discourse, I find that we have a tremendous tension, and you find that in the report a little bit, between, on the one hand, trying to treat labor as any other factor of production. After all, we have human capital theory, labor. We have marginal productivity theory, which is meant to apply to all factors, no matter what. So there's this tremendous tension. I think it's part of our DNA as economists to try and bring labor into that standard mode. And yet, we keep coming up against resistances to that, not only from other disciplines, but from reality on the ground. If labor is paid as marginal product, but the marginal product is zero, then how do you actually think about payments in that context? And that's what led Arthur Lewis to formulate his way of thinking about these things. Do we think of property rights in labor in the same way as we think of property rights in other factors of production? Slavery was outlawed a long time ago. But when we think of child labor, we find similar tensions in economics. It's sort of a rights-based approach versus a sort of a more consequentialist approach of whether changes in child labor laws could have this or that effect on income earning capacities of households. So we have this tension in that context as well. International migration. Economists typically say, we berate policymakers. We say, if only you could globalize labor as much as you globalize capital. Okay? Then we do compute with general equilibrium models where we show that if you did remove these controls, you'd have a tremendous increase in global welfare, etc. But of course, policymakers are reacting to the fact that labor is not the same. Labor is not a factor of production the same as capital. Okay? And I think we have to then understand that concern and react to it in that appropriate way. But the tendency in economics is to think of labor as being yet another factor of production. And the final point I would make is in terms of labor is that the fact of human agency is so important. And certainly the recent developments in behavioral labor economics, behavioral labor, I believe have been touched upon and taken on board in this report, and I think that's one of the good things about this report. The link of jobs to trust, link of jobs to civic engagement, and so on. So we have this other strand which says labor is not actually just yet another factor of production, but in our economy's DNA, and I think it's a good thing that we try to pull it towards it being another factor of production. And it's that creative tension which I think is actually reflected in this report as much as in the current discourse. So with those few words, let me stop, and let's hand over to Eric to take on the next panel. Thank you.
I'll just say a few words about Eric because I owe him special thanks. When I was starting my academic career, he was the chairman of the economics department at Cornell that actually hired me. So I remember coming to his office and negotiating the terms once I found out they were going to make me an offer. And it so happened my girlfriend at the time was a graduate student there. And I made sure that she would tell nobody that we were going together because that might affect the bargaining strength that I felt I had. And so I came in there, and I remember I had an offer from somewhere else that was a couple $100 more. And I was telling Eric, well, love Cornell, I'd love to come here, but it would be good if you could match the other offer. And Eric said, I know about Kathy, and now I know you're coming here. So I ran out, talked to Kathy, and she said, I didn't tell anybody. I just told this one assistant professor, Mark Gertler, who now happens to be a senior colleague here at NYU. And he promised he wouldn't tell anybody. So I always joke that as a result, my lifetime earnings were always $200 less than at the beginning. No, but Eric and I had a wonderful time. He actually taught me how to do development economics. He is the author of many academic papers, books, but also reports. I think that Eric was really the person who was at his best working with international institutions, preparing reports, etc. And so it was natural for Ravi and me to think of him as being the chair and therefore also the one who determines the tone at the beginning of this conference. Eric.
Actually, I think we'll have Martin give the presentation of the report first, and then a break, and then Eric's panel will follow.
Very good. Can I have a footnote?
Oh, please.
On what Jan just said. I think everything he said was correct, but I still remember that I learned a great deal about collective bargaining when we met with Jan, and I realized that he was a much better bargainer than I was. So I think he already showed a facility for dealing with different employment type issues that has made it possible for him to have I think, a wonderful career.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Martin, take over. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming, and really everybody from the team, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here with us, and thank you to SIPA, Columbia, Cornell for organizing this conference. In fact, we see this conference as we are disbanding as a team at this point as a true celebration. We are amazed by the group of people that has been brought here. So we came in large numbers. The entire team is gathered around because we are so impressed and so humbled that you want to have us here to discuss the report. Let me tell you, I will not just present the report, I will do a very brief presentation of the report. I want to tell more of the background to set the stage for the discussion. Many of you here know about it. We are blessed that among our advisors, there were people like Ravi and Ravi. We have been discussing with many of you, with Gary. I was telling Gary last time we saw each other was, 10 days ago or something like that. We've been in a constant process of discussion. So some of you know a bit of the story, but I would like to set the stage a bit more. First, why jobs? The World Development Report is like the dean of these international publications, 34 years now. But it is only the second time in the history of the report that the World Bank goes into labor or employment issues. It has only been at exceptional times that this has happened for a variety of reasons. Institutional mandate, we are supposed to be dealing with poverty, and of course we make the point that poverty reduction has to do with jobs, but poverty, growth. There are organizations like the ILO, which are in the international architecture have a greater role to play on employment issues. So it has been only in very exceptional circumstances that the World Bank decided to have a report related to jobs. The previous one was 1995. That was when the Uruguay round of the WTO was being completed, and then the question is, what will globalization imply for workers? Should trade and labor agreements be linked, and these kind of questions. Now globalization is with us, and probably the two main reasons that made our senior management choose jobs as a subject for this report were the global crisis and the centrality it has given to jobs issues, but also political events like the Arab Spring that brought a connection between jobs and social developments, which probably was obvious to everyone else, but not so much to us inside the bank. And that forced us, in a way, to rethink and gave us a space, as Ravi said, to look beyond just the more traditional, narrow economic approaches to jobs. This is a World Bank report. At the same time, it is a research report. I must say, been in the bank many years, but I was genuinely impressed by how much intellectual freedom we were given. We were even encouraged to challenge conventional wisdom, to stay relatively far from our operations part of the bank so that we will not come up saying, oh, what we're doing is great and let's do some more of it with this interesting twist that we had not thought about before. And that was very much respected throughout the process, to a point where, in fact, our team is disbanding. That's, the way the World Development Reports work is an entire team that takes a subject and then goes on and then is for the bank, other development agencies, others in the world to perhaps do something with the ideas in the report. And we find that sometimes the winds for change may come from outside, and we are delighted that we have this opportunity to discuss with such an influential group of people some of the ideas in this report. Because in a way, we all are going back to our day jobs or to other day jobs at this point. And so we are curious to see how far the ideas in this report will go. And that may depend on what happens, not just in the bank, but outside the bank. The World Development Report is a research report, but it's not just a World Bank report. Our team, 7 people, plus production, assistants, etc., is here, but we work it with a lot of people too. Increasingly, the World Development Report is written with the world and not just in the World Bank. We had a very distinguished panel of advisors, as I mentioned. We worked with researchers from all over the world. There are like 55 background papers, and if one goes to the website, there are already like 30-something which are posted there. We ran country case studies in 7 countries, which we thought were good examples of different types of jobs challenges, and we decided to do that not with World Bank colleagues, but with really researchers from the countries, respected people from academia, advisors, policy makers, to get a second opinion on how to think about jobs in these countries. We ran consultations in 24 countries. We had a close collaboration with the ILO, of course. We also had interactions with OECD, IMF. So it's a research report, but it's not just a World Bank report. We tried to do it more as a world report. Now, before I go to telling briefly the structure, so what will be behind each of the sessions we will have in this day and a half, let me tell you a bit more about the overall perspective. In a way, when we started with jobs, we started with some lack of satisfaction with the way we were approaching jobs in development. And the way we were approaching jobs in development was to think there is something that is very important, that's growth. And if growth works, then you get employment as derived demand, and you get all the goodies that go with that. And then if employment doesn't follow in the numbers or the type of employment you would like to see, then you think there must be something wrong with the labor market. And then we end up in very heated debates about the extent of flexibility, rigidity, protection. You have seen the discussions on doing business indicators, employing workers index, and we thought, well, that gives us a lot of heat, but not necessarily a lot of light. And it seems to be missing the point of some of the areas which seem most important for jobs: urbanization, green revolution, global integration. There are other things that seem to be way more important than the regulatory part. So we felt that we were a bit trapped intellectually in the framework of labor economics, a framework where people sell their labor services. Didn't seem completely right when half of the people at work in the world are not wage earners, and way more than half in developing countries. The biggest employers in developing countries are farms and people who are self-employed. Even when it comes to some of these issues where labor is not like any other factor of production, like issues of voice, we tend to think of voice as bargaining between employers and employees. And even if you look at the events in the Arab world, one way to describe the events in the Arab world and how they started is that they started with this young man in Tunisia who sacrificed his life to protest the lack of a job, which is a narrative that goes very well with the idea of unemployment as the central issue. But another way to look at that is that this is a young man who was a street vendor and was protesting abuse by local authorities. So it was an issue that was slightly different. So we thought we should not get trapped into labor economics. Labor economics is an important tool for us, but it should not be the central tool. We should try to reposition jobs into development economics. Which, of course, hasn't made us always very popular with labor economists, and that's one of the reasons why we're very intimidated to be here, because there are many labor economists here. It works better with development economists, who seem to be more receptive to this idea. One way, perhaps more like purely technical of looking at this, is to think, well, first, jobs have many dimensions, and earnings, productivity are some of them, and there are other dimensions that matter. And we were blessed to have George Akerlof in our panel of advisors, and some of his ideas about jobs as providers of identity, jobs connecting to networks were very influential. So first things, jobs is more than just what we earn, more than just what we do. Jobs are part of who we are and how we interact in society. And second is that jobs affect us not just ourselves, but affect others. And again, along these three dimensions, there are important spillovers, and they are more important in countries where markets are imperfect, institutions are not very well developed. And so in a way, what the report does is to think, well, let's not just look at one aspect of jobs, let's take all of these multiple dimensions of jobs for which there may not be markets and there may not be prices. And second, let's not look just at what these characteristics imply for the person who holds the job, but what do they do collectively. So in a way, what we're looking at is the derivative from an extra job on the social objective function as opposed to the derivative of the extra job on the individual. This has important implications, which I'm sure we will be discussing at some point, because then the metrics we care about are not necessarily the individual metrics. What I'm saying by that is that there are jobs that may be very good for an individual and not so good for society, and vice versa. And we found many examples in development of jobs supported through transfers or rents, which are, of course, great jobs for the people who have them, but not necessarily for others, or jobs that do not meet the kind of standards we would love to see for ourselves, and yet have had an enormous transformational power. And that made us a bit nervous immediately, because once you go in this direction, and it's something we make the point, you realize that jobs can be, informal sector jobs can be transformational. Informal sector jobs that empower women, that reduce poverty. And so we said, and we specifically chose like a country like Bangladesh and the garment industry as one of our case studies. And so the question is, can sweatshop jobs be good jobs for development? That's a very tricky question. And so we did something, again, that is a bit new for us at the World Bank, which is to say there are lines that should not be crossed. And that's where we decided to go also with a rights approach, which is a bit unusual for the World Bank. So the report is quite strong on saying, well, what are the no-nos? Where is that this is unacceptable? But the no-nos are not necessarily being informal. So let me tell you we try to summarize in these times where attention spans are short. We try to be very Twitter-like in our communication. So if you look at the report, you will see that we have like 10 tweets that are like, what are the takeaway messages? So let me go through not all the 10 tweets, but just a few to give a sense of what we came out as an approach. The first one, we call it jobs drive development. Why do we say that? Well, we start again, let's make one thing clear. Jobs get better with growth. There is no doubt about that. There is a slide at some point when I managed to progress in the slide presentation.
We all have the overview, and if you could point this
yeah.
Page 38.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Page 38, you have the equivalent of the slide where you have the 10 tweets. One of the first tweets there is jobs drive development. And what we mean by that is that while it is true that jobs get better with growth, average earnings get better, coverage, benefits get better, coverage of social protection gets better, we were also interested by the other arrow in this connection between growth and jobs. And then by doing that, we realized that many of the things we care about in development actually happen through jobs. Poverty reduction happens through jobs. Gender equality is fostered when there are jobs that empower women. Urbanization is about people working in cities and working with each other. Global integration is people connected to a market. Conflict. The literature on conflict is a lot about having alternatives to confrontational behavior. So we wanted to go in both directions. We didn't want to be in the employment as derived demand, but going the other way. Second tweet I want to emphasize is that it's not just the number of jobs. Of course, numbers matter, and there is a page of factoids that has been picked up by the media quite a lot. And numbers are really staggering. 200 million people unemployed. By a rough estimate, 600 additional jobs needed over a 15-year period just to keep employment to working age population ratios constant. 621 million young people ages 15 to 24 who are neither working nor studying, and that's not necessarily leisure. So the numbers are very big. But it's not just a matter of numbers in several ways. First, in very poor countries, people are not unemployed. People are doing something. There may be jobs of very low productivity, very low earnings, but most of the poor work, and most of the poor work very long hours. So it's not just a shortage of jobs. Even in poor countries, you can have high youth unemployment rates, but in general, unemployment is less of a primary concern in developing countries than it is in industrial countries. And second is not just the nature, the number of jobs, it's the nature of the jobs. Again, it's not the same a job for a poor person and a job not for a poor person. It's not the same a job for a woman and a job for a man. It's not the same a job for someone who could be in a gang or a militia and for someone else. So that's a second message we wanted to bring up. The third one is that the jobs that really have the greatest development payoffs depend on the circumstances. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. We developed a typology in the report that combines several dimensions, combines the level of development, but not in a mechanical way, the resource endowments, the institutions of a country, and the demography. And we came up with these 8 cases that were quite different, going from agrarian societies, conflict-affected countries, resource-rich countries, urbanizing economies, small island nations, all the way to aging societies. I'm thinking, well, both the employment creation opportunities and the nature of the jobs that will have a highest impact, let's say, on the social objective function, are different in this case. And our country case studies were aimed at trying to understand what these jobs were in each of the cases. And then the fourth one, which is also a bit controversial, we found that the labor policies, the kind of things we focus on when we start from a labor economics approach, are important, but are not the most important part. Jobs are central to development, labor policies less so. This is not to say that labor policies are not at all important or irrelevant. The way we came out, when I say labor policy, again, we don't say labor market policies. Labor policies, we thought about 4 big areas. One is regulation, think minimum wages, employment protection legislation. One is representation, let me call it representation, not bargaining necessarily, so it's the elements of voice. But again, could be voice for wage employed, but it's also voice for the self-employed. The third one is active labor policies, skills, training, placement, and the like. And the final one is insurance, both insurance for labor market risk, and that's unemployment insurance, which is quite uncommon in developing countries, but broader programs for insurance that work through employment, pensions, disability, and health insurance, and things like that. And we found that a very thorough review of the literature, that within a certain range, these policies do not have a big effect on efficiency. They have countervailing effects of different sorts. They have important redistributional impacts, some of them expected, capital to labor, some of them a bit less conventional. In general, they favor these interventions, and policies tend to favor more prime-age men than they do women or young people. But within that range, it's mainly redistribution. And then what we found is that there are 2 cliffs. Not many countries fall in these cliffs, but they matter. One cliff, the one perhaps we had paid more attention in the past, is the cliff of the misguided interventions that really clog job creation and dynamism that make it difficult to connect to world markets and to be in modern value chains. But the other cliff, again, I'm thinking about the rights perspective too, is when you don't have any form of voice, when you have no mechanism of protection at all. So these 2 cliffs, and there are countries that clearly fall over the cliff, but many countries are within this range that is country-specific. So one of the messages of the report is jobs matter, but what matters for jobs may not necessarily be in the labor market policy. Let me take you very briefly through the structure of the report. The report has 3 parts. The first part is trying to disentangle all of these many things jobs do. Like Ravi said, that labor is, in a way, a different factor of production. And we regroup it, we call it jobs are transformational. We regrouped it in 3 main areas. I'm skipping things so that we have time. We regrouped the effects of jobs in 3 main areas: living standards, productivity, and social cohesion. We could have regrouped in different ways. We did so in part because we wanted to have an empirical basis. You will see, if you look at the report, that there is a very strong effort to have empirical evidence. There are many, many references to studies in developing countries, and there is a big data effort of which I will talk at the end. The living standards pillar is something we can anchor in the kind of household surveys we use for poverty assessments. And so we have a database there that is very rich. Productivity, we can anchor on the kind of enterprise surveys, investment climate assessments, rural investment climate assessments, so things where the unit of observation are firms or farms or units of economic of production. And finally, the social cohesion, which is perhaps the most tentative and newest part for us here. We use it quite a lot of values surveys and these kind of assessments where there are indications on beliefs and behaviors of people who have different types of jobs. So the first 3 chapters of the report, after presenting the challenges, are one on each of these. On living standards, let me say just a word about each of these pillars, with the idea that, again, that we are going not just from the top, from growth to jobs, but basically one builds development, one builds this social objective function through these 3 aspects, which are connected but not mechanically connected. On living standards, first thing to emphasize, it may be trivial, but I think it has to be repeated, most household earnings are from work. This is from a lot of poverty assessments and micro data sets. There, the dark green is self-employment, slightly lighter green is wage employment. Only the top part, light green, very light green, and white is transfers and others. And you see that with the exception of a couple of transition economies at the left, it's like 3/4 of household income are from work in developing countries. Second is that poverty reduction happens mainly through jobs. The scope for many developing countries, both in terms of resources or institutional and administrative capacity to reduce poverty through programs, through transfers, is quite limited. So here you have a mixture of middle income and high income countries. And what we looked at is that transitions over time, what changes in households that moved out of poverty, that crossed the poverty line. And in most cases, there is a labor event, which is either earning more from your job, changing jobs, having more household members working, and so on and so forth. It's even stronger in the case of extreme poverty. Here is a decomposition of changes in poverty. So the total is 100. Sometimes you have effects that are negative and so go down, and others that offset that negative. The light blue are changes that can be attributed to labor income. And you see that the light blue, especially the more you go to the right, the more you go to the poorest countries, is really what drives extreme poverty reduction. Jobs and productivity. I want to emphasize now areas that would be discussed where there were, I think, innovations in this report. Jobs and productivity is a bit trickier because the surveys we have here, I told you we wanted to have an empirical base. The surveys we have here are enterprise surveys that tend to be biased towards the formal sector, the urban sector. If for poverty analysis, we have nationally representative household surveys. This has been a drive that has many, many years. It started with LSMS project, with Poverty World Development Report, 1990s. We don't have the equivalent for economic units. And so we have a very distorted picture of what the distribution of economic activity is in developing countries. Even when we put factors of expansion to the surveys, we did this exercise. We took the plant-level surveys we had, the enterprise surveys of the bank, and we constructed the distribution by size of economic units in a country. And then we did the same from household surveys where there was information on where do people work, like saying, I work on my own, or I work with someone else, or I'm in my big company. You do that for an industrial country, you get the same distribution. You do it for Germany, you're almost there. You do it for a developing country, you get a completely different story. And I'm not just talking about an Ethiopia. We did it in a lot of detail for Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Chile. You do it even for Chile, which is at the limit, is already an OECD country. And the story is completely different. And so we came to the conclusion that what we think about firm dynamics can be quite wrong. Even answering very simple questions like who creates most jobs, and the standard answer is, of course, small and medium enterprises, is not true. In developing countries, what we find is two things. One is a lot of firms are born large relative to the countries, because basically they are born thanks to state support, connections, and so on and so forth, and they stay more or less where they are born. They have no dynamism. And then you have enormous amount of job creation at the low end, micro enterprises up to 1 and up to 9 or 10 people. But you have an enormous amount of job destruction. And so the net is very small. There's plenty of churning. And there are very few of the gazelles of the units that are born in garages and become Hondas and Microsofts in developing countries. So there is something wrong in firm dynamics that we wanted to highlight. So this slide is just to show that there is a lot of gross job creation, a lot of gross job destruction, even in countries where the net job creation is not too large. And this is to say that the size, the share of employment represented by micro-enterprises, here it is for the manufacturing sector, is enormous. Can be like 97% in the case of Ethiopia. While at the same time, we have wonderful survey for Ethiopia. People say, oh, we have a palace of data and firms for Ethiopia, but it's for these 3%. So we may be getting, one of the things the report tries to emphasize is the importance of entrepreneurship and what drives entrepreneurship and why is it not necessarily working. You will see if you go to the report, in order to keep it readable, we end each chapter with a difficult question. What we call a difficult question. They can be downloaded separately from the website. There are like 4 or 5 pages of standard. Let me just say a word about the difficult question here. What we ask is, so can entrepreneurship be fostered? That's the difficult question that finishes this chapter. And what we do in each of these is we start from a conventional wisdom, and the conventional wisdom today is very negative on this. It used to be very upbeat and very positive a few years ago with Hernando de Soto and the thinking that, oh, everybody's an entrepreneur. It's just that there are all these stupid regulations that are getting on the way, and if we remove red tape, we will have a thriving market economy. But now the balance has shifted. I would say the conventional wisdom is more in the spirit of Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. It's like, oh, a lot of these people are just into survivorship. Their only dream is to become wage employees, and there is no potential there. And so what we go is we look in more detail at who these people are. There are by now a lot of randomized interventions of trying to do different things to see where is that we get entrepreneurship going. I will not give you the answer here, but that's the spirit of each of the questions we asked. Third pillar, where in this jobs are transformation, is the social cohesion part. We decided to have an operational definition of social cohesion. Social cohesion is something attractive, compelling, but it was difficult to handle. At the same time, shortly before we launched our report, the OECD produced a report on social cohesion, a very rich report, and we interacted with the team that produced that report. But we thought, well, there is so much in there that we didn't know very well where to start. There were issues of inequality, mobility, social capital. So we said, let's try to have a very operational definition of social cohesion, and that is the capacity to handle collective decision-making in a peaceful way. That doesn't mean social stability. In some of the country consultations we had, people loved the idea of social stability. We said, no, it's not social stability. There can be demonstrations, there can be strikes. It's just the fact that the outcome of this process is one that can be solved peacefully. And we used two proxy indicators for social cohesion, two like intermediate inputs. One is trust beyond our own group. The other is civic engagement, as measured by participation in up to 8 types of organizations, from at school to politics, religious groups, and unions, associations, and so on and so forth. The good thing is we started finding interesting correlations. What this figure shows, there are more in the report, is how being active, civically engaged, is associated with having or not having a job. On the left panel, and you see that except for low-income countries, where again unemployment is not necessarily a very relevant concept, not having a job is associated with less civic engagement. The panel on the right, we look not just at having a job or not having a job, but what kind of job. And there we call motivating jobs that have 3 characteristics. You have independence, creativity, and a potential to grow. And again, except for low-income countries, having a motivating job is associated with greater civic engagement. Now, of course, one can say this is a correlation, and we do not claim more. It could be just that people who are more engaged are also better at getting jobs and get better at getting good jobs. But we found in this quite thorough review, we find examples where there seems to be more than that. This is from a study in Indonesia, running a value survey type of instrument in 2000 and 2007, people working or not working in the years, and you see that the change in community participation is much greater for people who did not have a job in 2000 and have a job in 2007, in red at the top, and the lowest is for the opposite, people who had a job and don't have a job. So some indication that there is a connection there, and there is a connection that is not just correlation. Second part of the report asks the question, okay, so jobs are transformational, but what are good jobs for development? What are the jobs that will give us more of these transformations? And we decided to do this in 2 ways. One is a very technocratic way, and I will explain it, and one is a very applied way. So let's go the entire spectrum. If we were to do this in an economics department, how will we do this? And if we were to do this in the economic unit advising the Minister of Finance in a developing country, will we do it differently? And it's different, but some of the conclusions are similar. But to motivate what we have in mind here, let me show you a survey that we conducted with support from Norway. And I must say, a lot of people supported us in this. I know everybody thinks that the World Bank is a very rich institution, but the World Development Report is not a very rich report. So we had to go and raise money all around the world while trying to protect the independence of the report. And here, our Norwegian friends were extremely generous in supporting this survey. We ran it in 4 countries that more or less match our typology of challenges from Sierra Leone for a conflict-affected country to Egypt for a country with high youth unemployment, urbanizing economies. And this report, this survey uses many of the concepts in the report applied to local populations. All of the microdata is downloadable from our website, so you can get the data from there. And here the question is, what is a good job for you, and what is a good job for society? So the horizontal axis is the value, what kind of job I would like to have, and the vertical axis is the answer to the question, this job is good for society. And there are 5 types of jobs there. In blue, civil servant. In red, doctor. Green, farmer. Yellow, shop owner. And teacher. And you see, for instance, everywhere, everybody would love to be a civil servant. No doubt about it. But except in China, where they seem to have a high esteem for civil servants, in few countries, people think that civil servants make a great contribution to society. Everybody has a high esteem of teachers. Everybody has a high esteem of doctors. But there is also something that is very country-specific. In Sierra Leone, being a farmer is valued socially as well. So we wanted to play on this idea that, again, it's like you think of the derivative of having a job on my utility and derivative of having a job on the social objective function, which in a way resonates. You are in New York with Occupy Wall Street, teachers versus traders, this kind of distinction. But we wanted to be quite systematic on it. And so what we did is to look at a range of areas that we use in development economics and said, do we get anything that is empirically solid on what are the jobs that have this greater payoff when taking into account not just what they do to me, but what they do to society. And we found that, in fact, a lot of what we use in development economics is about jobs and these development payoffs from jobs. So just, again, to regroup in an easy way, we just highlight 3 for each of the pillars. Let me start by the pillar on living standards. Jobs for the poor. If you care about poverty reduction, it means in your social objective function you attach more weight to the well-being of the poor than to the well-being of the non-poor. So 2 jobs that are identical as jobs have a different social value depending on whether it's a poor person getting the job or not, or someone else. Jobs that empower women, and there is plenty of literature. So in each of the cases, we went to the micro literature to show what do we know about this. So jobs that empower women. There's plenty of evidence on how household allocations, resource allocations change depending on who is bringing the income home, how investments in education and in health of children change. So this is, again, a spillover. Someone else is benefiting from this. Jobs that do not shift burden on others. Perhaps this is the part that is closer to what we will have said from the beginning from a labor economics perspective. If you have uneven bargaining power, if you have discrimination, if you have rents, then of course the individual value of the job and the social value of the job are different. On the productivity pillar, one can say, look at urban economics. A lot of the empirics in urban economics are equations where we measure labor productivity on the left-hand side related to density of employment on the right-hand side. They are about spillovers on aggregate productivity from jobs in cities. Jobs connected to global markets. You take the new trade literature, and it's not just about how working integrated with global markets may make you more productive, but how it changes the entire structure of the sector you are in and pushes out of business economic units that are less productive. The environment is the easiest one for us as an economist. So what are jobs that contribute to green growth or not? We do not use, if you want that a subject for debate, we do not use the green jobs term. We are a bit skeptical that the current definitions of green jobs are always suited for developing countries. A lot of the real green jobs in developing countries have to do with management of commons and forests by poor groups, ethnic minority groups in agriculture. They have nothing to do with windmills or with clean manufacturing. But the idea that some jobs have a different payoff socially depending on their impact on the environment is there. And then the last 3, very much inspired again from our conversations with George Akerlof, is that jobs shape identity, who we are and how we behave in society. Jobs provide networks. Think of rural migrants going to cities, and part of the integration to cities because the job is a way to connect. And jobs that give a sense of opportunity and fairness. So it's not just the distribution of jobs. Who has access to jobs is a way of feeling that you have a stake in society or you don't. So this was like the technocratic way to go about it. In every one of these 9 areas, we try to review studies that show that these spillovers exist and matter and can be quantified. To some extent, they can be quantified. But then we decide, okay, now let's go to the other end. Let's do it as our friends in a developing country will have to do when the prime minister or the finance minister say, so what do we do about jobs? And here we took, again, researchers from local institutes. Again, we were very lucky, very privileged that several countries helped us with this. So Mexico Canada helped us with Mexico, Japan with Bangladesh, Australia with Papua New Guinea, Denmark with Mozambique, and so on and so forth. And we say, okay, run with these ideas and tell us what you find. And what we found is that the kind of jobs that really have the greatest payoffs are very different in different circumstances. You are in an agrarian economy, there is no way to escape that having smallholder farming becoming more productive is the key. There will be no poverty reduction, serious scale, there will be no off-farm employment. But you also need cities that are functional. One of the things we found is that cities in many sub-Saharan African countries urbanization does not result in productivity gains. People move from very low productivity in rural areas to very low productivity in urban areas. And so getting functional cities matter. One could go through various examples, but basically the idea that one has to identify what good jobs for development are in different circumstances, and that's quite specific. This second part of the report also goes to the point that specific country agendas are connected, and they are connected through 2 mechanisms. One is migration of people, and so we built here on previous work by colleagues at the research department of the bank who have painstakingly put together population censuses since the 1960s and done all the matrices of bilateral migration, so we had a very rich database to work on. But what we did on migration is, again, to use and this should echo what Ravi was saying, the 3 lenses to look at migration. If you only look from a productivity or earnings perspective, you say, sure, we run the general equilibrium model, there are gains of productivity, global welfare will increase by this much if everybody could migrate from countries with low productivity to countries with high productivity. But then it's more complex. It's more complex because there are also, even in productivity, there are implications which are not immediate, which are building networks, return migration. And on social cohesion, you have effects, positive and negative, at both ends. So we wanted to apply the same, more nuanced lens to migration. And then especially we paid attention to the migration of jobs, which is another way to call globalization. For instance, one of the things that became clear is that manufacturing jobs have migrated. That's not surprising, but the total number of manufacturing jobs in the world has been relatively stable for 15 years or so. Productivity gains have been so big that basically, even if we have many more manufacturing goods, we don't have many more manufacturing jobs. And one estimate now is about 85 million jobs in manufacturing could leave China as labor costs in China increase. And so the question is, where will these jobs go? This could be a wonderful opportunity for sub-Saharan Africa. It could be an opportunity for South Asia. But then the difficult question at the end of this chapter is, when are we competing for jobs as opposed to making the broader pie bigger? And there are also questions that what will happen in services. What has happened on manufacturing has only started in services. Third part of the report is what are the policy implications of all these. And here we came up with our prism, our jobs lens here becomes a pyramid. We came with 3 layers. One that is the fundamentals, which perhaps there is nothing very innovative there, the kind of things that need to be in place. Macroeconomic stability, an enabling business environment, some basic human capital, but here again there is one difficult question in the report, skills or jobs, what comes first? So we do not make the case that skills is always the driver of jobs, sometimes it's the other way around. And the rule of law. But on the rule of law, again, we wanted to take very strongly the rights perspective, so the rule of law is not just property rights, it's the human rights associated with jobs. But that is a layer that we say, okay, pay attention to these things wherever you are. It doesn't matter whether you are a conflict-affected country or an urbanizing country or so on. Then comes the labor policies part, where I say here the message is a bit more unconventional, which is basically stay on your plateau. There is not a single set of policies that matters that is useful everywhere. Flexicurity can be great in Denmark. Perhaps if you try it in Togo, you will not get the same kind of result. Just know your plateau and avoid these two cliffs of misguided interventions or complete lack of voice and social protection. But the most interesting part for us is the top part, is the priorities, which is understand what the challenge is, what are the good jobs for development in your context, and why is that you don't have more of these. So here is again a bit the technocratic approach is if you know that the good jobs for development, let's say, are getting smallholder farming going, getting the green revolution going, then the question is, are incentives misaligned in some way? Are there reasons why you don't have more of those jobs? Like, for instance, you have very, very low participation rates by women, and you think there is underexploited potential. So is there something that is preventing women, or is this really a choice, an optimal choice or not? Now, what we find in going through this decision tree is that in some cases the constraints can be easily identified. In some cases they can be very diffuse. Think again of the case of women. Why is that women in some countries have such low participation rates? And it's a mixture of cultural and social norms that you cannot change just by issuing a decree. And so the question is, in other cases, the constraint can be identified, but politically it's very difficult to remove. So the decision tree is completed by saying, when you know what the constraint is and you can address it, go and address it. Otherwise, bypass it. And we have a couple of examples in the report on how this has been done. On gender, how Latin America has been increasing steadily labor participation rates by women through interventions that are around, that are things from daycare centers to education to discrimination. We have the final question in the report is when you have really serious rigidities, like the Industrial Disputes Act of India or the hukou system in China, how come countries can go around it? And the comparison China versus India there is quite interesting, because when you look at what China did in terms of urbanization and moving a lot of people in spite of the hukou system is quite different from what has been happening in India, where urbanization rates have not picked up and poverty remains very high in around secondary cities. So this is like the technocratic approach, but again, we went to the less technocratic approach. We asked in these 8 countries, 8 types of jobs challenges. Don't get me wrong, it's not countries. Some countries can have more than one challenge. Countries can be agrarian and conflict affected. But in our typology of countries, are there countries that really succeeded at addressing the jobs challenges? And we found in every case countries that in a way can be our champions. Like in an agrarian economy, you look at Vietnam in the late 80s, early 90s, the fastest poverty reduction we know. And that happened through really making smallholder farming productive by land reform, taking the state-owned enterprises out of the monopolies of commercialization of agricultural products, agricultural extension. You take resource-rich countries, and our champion is Chile. What did Chile do? Chile is home to 1/3 of the copper of the world. When you have these situations, you tend to have real exchange appreciation, you have rents, you have these very dual societies where some people live out of pseudo jobs that are supported through rent, and then there are immigrants who do the menial jobs. Nothing like that in Chile, because they had very strong programs that were really public finance programs, how to use the reserves, how to invest the reserves, how to preserve incentives for people to work and engage in global markets. And Chile has diversified despite being a copper producer and despite the boom in commodity prices. So for each case, we found a country that had done something that really had made a difference. And what was interesting is that something was never, in none of the 8 cases we review, labor policies. It was land policies, it was fiscal policies, it was urbanization policies. Some had some labor reforms, but not necessarily in the direction one will have expected. And I will perhaps finish with this example, which is our high youth unemployment countries. That when we looked at high youth unemployment countries, we said, well, the temptation is to say this is demography. When you have these youth bulges, it's almost unavoidable. But that's not very convincing. You look at East Asia, nobody had demographic transitions like those of East Asia, and high youth unemployment was not a problem in East Asia. There was a demographic dividend. It's easy to say, oh, it's education and the mismatch of education, and Ravi will make the case very convincingly. He has a point that the misalignment of education supplies because the incentives were distorted in hiring graduates. If you have a diploma, you are in the civil service. But in other countries, it was not like that. You take Tunisia. Tunisia has a good education system. So we came with this idea that what is really the problem is when you have economies of privilege. Privilege in accessing some jobs in the public sector, but especially privilege in accessing business. In countries like Tunisia, the fact that there were only two internet providers and nothing around them, and the internet providers were connected to the family in power and so on and so forth. And our champion there is Slovenia. Slovenia had a situation like that, with a very dysfunctional modern sector at the beginning of the transition, and European accession to the European Union brought the competition in the sectors that could absorb young people. But so again, it was not. Slovenia has, by any other standard, a very rigid labor market, very highly unionized, centralized negotiation, and so on and so forth. So one of the messages we take from here is that policies for jobs, the real successes in policies for jobs, may not necessarily be in the labor market. As long as you are in the plateau, you don't fall off the cliffs. Last point is there are some implications for global policy, and I think in a place like this one, it's important to highlight. And we have 4 there to highlight. One is on rights and standards. What can be done to ensure that countries do not fall in the first cliff, the cliff of complete lack of voice, violation of rights, and so on and so forth. And we reviewed a lot of the experience of what is being done on corporate social responsibility and so on and so forth. In all of the report, we try to stay clear. There is no reference to any World Bank program or anything like that, except here where we refer to the Better Work program of the IFC and ILO, because that's an interesting model where it's not just putting pressure, but helping economic units in the countries, in developing countries, become more productive and having the scope then to better comply. Second area is investments, cross-border investments in services. Like I said, we have seen the migration of jobs in manufacturing. It has done wonders for developing countries. How about services? And there what we find is that there is a great reluctance of developing countries to liberalize in services, but for good reason, is that many of these services sectors, health, finance, have very serious market imperfections. So it's not just a matter of bringing competition. You need to also bring good regulation. And we may not be offering enough models on how to liberalize in a way that addresses the concerns about those inefficiencies of services sectors becoming worse. On migration policies, this idea that there are these 3 impacts, living standards, productivity, and social cohesion, and they matter both from sending and recipient countries, makes it very clear that there is something to be gained from bilateral migration agreements. We have no hope of having a WTO of migration. Everything that has been at a global scale has not gone too far. But there are very good models of bilateral migration agreements where both sides have incentives in enforcing the terms of the agreement, and you have much less illegal migration, much less abuse of workers' rights, but also much less abuse of people overstaying their visas and so on and so forth. And the last one, important one, is data. One of the things we found is that there is a dearth of data. Jobs are central, but the data for jobs is not there. It's not like there is no data, don't get me wrong. If you go to the website of the ILO, you go to the website of the World Bank, there's plenty of data. It's just what are these data? And what happens is that quite often the ILO, counterparts of the ILO are labor ministries. The ILO gets the data from labor ministries. Labor ministries are not statistical agencies, so they will report employment, urban employment, wage employment, formal employment, depending on the year. ILO validates that, putting it on its website. We validate that by putting it in our website, saying source ILO, so it looks great. It has been validated by 2 large international institutions, and it means nothing. We are working closely with our colleagues in the research department of the IMF, where they are running all these relationships, Okun's law, growth and employment. They could not do anything for developing countries except for the most advanced emerging economies. So one of the reasons why our report is so thick is because at the end it has 85 pages of data. What we did a gigantic effort. We went to 750 household surveys that are nationally representative, and we coded from microdata who is working on what. We added 50 population censuses where we didn't have a household survey that was nationally representative. And we produced it. In doing this, we had data on 600 million people, detailed data on 600 million people. So this was a kind of Facebook size in terms of the scale of the effort. And you have like 31 variables in this annex at the end that come from the processing of this data. I'm sure there are mistakes, but we trust this data more than the data are there. Again, these data are available, can be downloaded from our database. We did another data effort, which I think is worth mentioning. The ILO has been collecting since the 1920s or 30s this thing that is completely unknown, which is called the October Inquiry Survey, where they send a letter to ministries of labor in different countries and say, tell us by earnings by occupation. And this has been compiled for decades and decades and not really used. And building on an effort that Richard Freeman started many years ago, we had those data recalibrated because the reporting is very different. So that you need assumptions where it's an average, a mean, a maximum, a minimum, where it's men, women, whatever. And so there is a wealth of data on how much does a bus driver or a bricklayer or an accountant earn since the 1980s. Those data, the calibrated data, are in the public domain also in our data set. But as I said at the beginning, we are disbanding now, and efforts for data are really serious undertakings. Again, our model was the 1990 poverty report. The 1990 poverty report is what took us all the way, the World Development Report, to the Millennium Development Goal, to being able to say how many people live in poverty in different countries. We believe that there is an agenda that is not just having urban labor force surveys to measure unemployment. It's really to have good labor models, employment models attached to household surveys, to have good data on all firms, including farms, micro enterprises, to understand the dynamics. And that's an agenda that is a global public good agenda. Think what will come after the MDGs. Is there, if jobs are central, is there anything that we should have on jobs? And this is something where we hope someone will be pushing for this agenda in the future. Thank you.